Have you ever had one of those moments where your whole life just shifts? Where you realize everything you thought you knew was actually a lie? That happened to me at 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday night when I found something in my husband's gym bag that changed everything. But let me start with who I was before that moment, because I think you'll recognize her. Maybe you'll see yourself in her story. My name is Clarine, and I'm 52 years old. I live in Houston. Well, I used to live there, with someone who made me feel like I was disappearing a little more each day. I'm good at my job, really good. I've helped recover over $3 million from my clients over the years. But somehow, in my own marriage, I'd become invisible. Where are you right now as you're reading this? Are you in your kitchen, maybe, having that first cup of coffee while the house is still quiet? Are you in your car, taking a few minutes before going inside? I picture you there, and it makes this feel less lonely to tell. The thing is, I used to be different, confident. When Robert and I first met, I was 31, running my own small tax practice, driving a little red convertible that I'd saved up for myself. I was the kind of woman who made decisions quickly, who spoke up in meetings, who didn't second-guess herself constantly. But 21 years of marriage to Robert had worn me down in ways I didn't even realize. It started small, little comments about my driving, my clothes, my opinions. "Are you sure about that, honey?" became his favorite phrase, always said with a smile, always reasonable. But it planted seeds of doubt that grew into this constant questioning of my own judgment.
By 52, I'd become the kind of woman who asked permission to buy groceries, who apologized for having opinions, who made herself smaller every day just to keep the peace. The night I found those boarding passes, I'd been lying awake listening to Robert's breathing. Have you ever done that? Laid there next to someone and felt completely alone? He'd been different lately, more critical, more impatient, staying later at work, always on his phone. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. After all, who was I to question someone as successful and confident as Robert? His gym bag was on the floor by his dresser. I wasn't snooping, not really. I was just going to move it so I wouldn't trip over it in the dark on my way to the bathroom. But when I picked it up, something crinkled inside. 2 boarding passes. First class to Rome. Tomorrow morning. His name and Amanda Patterson, his 26-year-old secretary. I stood there in our dark bedroom, holding those boarding passes, and felt something inside me just break. Not my heart, exactly. Something deeper than that. The last little piece of the woman I used to be. For 5 years, I'd been begging Robert to take me to Italy. It was my dream trip. I saved up vacation days, put money aside, bought travel books, planned itineraries. Every time I brought it up, he'd shoot it down. "Italy's not for people our age, Clarine. You just complain about all the walking. It's too expensive for something so impractical. Maybe when we're older and have more time." But here he was, taking Amanda, taking my dream trip with someone younger than we were our daughter. I sat on the edge of our bed, still holding those boarding passes, and cried. Not the pretty kind of crying you see in movies, but the ugly, body-shaking kind that comes from somewhere deep in your chest. I cried for all the times I'd made myself smaller. I cried for all the dreams I'd set aside. I cried for the woman I used to be before I started believing that my voice didn't matter. But then, somewhere in the middle of all that crying, something else started to bubble up. Anger, yes, but something more useful than anger. Clarity.
I looked at those boarding passes through my tears and thought, I help other women find money their husbands try to hide. I know exactly how this works. And for the first time in years, I felt a spark of the old Clarine, the one who didn't ask permission, the one who solved problems instead of just enduring them. Robert had made one very expensive mistake. He'd forgotten that his harmless little wife who ran a cute accounting business was actually someone who knew exactly how to trace money, how to find hidden assets, and how to make financial problems very public very quickly. As I sat there at 2:17 a.m. holding evidence of his betrayal, I realized something that would cost him everything. I wasn't too old for Italy. I was exactly the right age to show him what real consequences looked like.
Have you ever had someone underestimate you so completely that they handed you the exact tools you needed to defeat them? That's exactly what Robert had done. The morning after I found those boarding passes, I went through our house like I was conducting a professional investigation, because that's exactly what I was doing. You see, when you help other women find hidden money for a living, you develop certain instincts about where people hide things. Robert had left for his business trip at 5 a.m., kissing my forehead like nothing was wrong, telling me he'd miss me. I waited until his car disappeared down our street. Then I got to work. First, I made myself a proper cup of coffee. Not the hurried gulp I usually managed while rushing to iron his shirts or pack his lunch, but a real cup of coffee that I drank sitting at our kitchen table while the morning sun streamed through the windows. It was the first moment of quiet I'd had in our house in years, and I realized something that broke my heart. I'd been living like a guest in my own life. But that stops today, I told myself. Today, I start living like the owner. I spent the next 3 hours going through every financial document in our house with the same methodical approach I used for my clients. Bank statements, credit card bills, investment accounts, insurance policies. Everything. What I found made me sick to my stomach, but also gave me exactly what I needed. Over the past 8 months, Robert had been systematically stealing from our joint accounts. Not huge amounts at once, he was smarter than that, but $800 here, $1,200 there, always with explanations that seemed reasonable at the time. Car repair, work dinner, golf weekend with the guys. Total amount, $34,000.
But the real smoking gun was his credit card statement. Romantic dinners at expensive restaurants during lunch hours, a $2,800 charge at Tiffany & Co., hotel rooms booked for weekday afternoons, and the most damning evidence of all, $18,000 in charges for their Italian vacation, all made while I was at work, believing he was planning this business trip. I made copies of everything. Then I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick to work and drove to the bank. I'd like to speak to someone about protecting my assets, I told the manager, using the same professional tone I used with my clients' financial institutions. Within an hour, I'd moved our entire savings account, $127,000, into a new account in my name only. Under Texas law, I had every right to access jointly held marital funds, especially when I had evidence that my spouse was stealing them. Next, I called Elena Rodriguez, a private investigator I'd worked with on several client cases. Elena, I need surveillance on my husband and his secretary. Full documentation. I suspect they've been having an affair using marital funds. Personal or professional? She asked gently. Both, I said.
surprised by how steady my voice sounded. I need enough evidence to make sure he never underestimates another woman again. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my sister Margaret. Robert had always complained that she talked too much and made me feel guilty whenever I spent time with her. Without his voice in my head telling me I was being inconsiderate, I found myself actually enjoying our conversation.
"You sound different, Clarine," Margaret said, after I'd told her everything. "Stronger." "I think I'm remembering who I used to be," I admitted. The next morning, I went to see Patricia Hernandez, the best divorce attorney in Houston. I'd referred clients to her for years, but I'd never sat on the other side of her conference table as the betrayed wife. "Clarine," she said, looking over the evidence I'd compiled, "this is some of the most thorough financial documentation I've seen. You've essentially built your own case." "I help women find hidden money for a living," I reminded her. "I just never thought I'd need to investigate my own husband. Based on this evidence, we can argue for an unequal distribution of assets. In Texas, when one spouse dissipates marital funds for an affair, the innocent spouse can be awarded additional property to compensate. What kind of timeline are we looking at? With documentation this solid, most attorneys would recommend settlement negotiations immediately. I'd estimate you could secure 60–70% of marital assets plus spousal support." I signed the papers that afternoon. For the first time in years, I was making a major life decision without asking anyone's permission. That evening, I sat in our backyard with a glass of wine. The good wine Robert always said was too expensive for a Tuesday. I thought about him in Rome, probably taking Amanda to some romantic restaurant, charging it all to our credit cards, completely unaware that I'd already emptied our accounts and filed for divorce. The woman he'd called too old for Italy was about to show him exactly what 52 years of experience could accomplish when properly motivated.
But the most amazing thing was how I felt. Not vengeful exactly, more like awakened. For the first time in decades, I felt like myself again. The woman who made decisions, who solved problems, who didn't need anyone's permission to live her own life. Do you know what I mean? Have you ever had a moment where you suddenly remembered who you really are, underneath all the roles you've been playing for everyone else? Robert thought he was coming home to the same diminished woman who'd tearfully accept his lies and betrayal. Instead, he was going to meet someone he'd forgotten existed, the original Clarine, the one who didn't take crap from anyone. While Robert strolled through Roman piazzas with his secretary, I was having my own Italian Renaissance right here in Houston. And honestly, mine was better than his, because it was real, it was mine, and nobody could take it away from me. The first morning after he left, I woke up without an alarm clock for the first time in years. No rushing to make his coffee exactly how he liked it. No tiptoeing around trying not to disturb his morning routine. No listening to him critique my outfit or my plans for the day. I made pancakes. When's the last time you made pancakes just for yourself? I made them with real maple syrup and fresh strawberries, and I ate them sitting at our dining room table reading a novel. Something Robert always said was a waste of time when there were productive things to do. It was the most peaceful breakfast I'd had in 20 years. That first day, Elena called with her preliminary surveillance report. "Clarine, I've got photographs of them at the airport, documentation of the hotel charges, and something interesting. Amanda has done this before. Twice. Different jobs, different married men, same pattern."
She's a professional homewrecker? Looks like it.
And your husband isn't nearly as smart as he thinks he is. He's left a paper trail that a first-year law student could follow. Knowing that Amanda was a serial affair partner somehow made everything clearer. This wasn't about love or even real attraction. It was just another transaction, and Robert was just another Mark who thought he was special. I spent that week doing something I hadn't done in years. I remembered what I actually enjoyed. I drove to the art museum and spent 3 hours wandering through exhibits without checking my watch or worrying about getting home to start dinner. I bought books I wanted to read. I planted flowers in the garden without asking anyone if they were practical. I also visited 3 of my former clients, women I'd helped recover hidden assets during their divorces. Over coffee, I told them what was happening in my own life. Dr. Morrison, said Sandra, whose ex-husband tried to hide $200,000 in offshore accounts, "You saved my financial future. Now it's time to save your own. What's funny is that you taught me to value my own expertise, but you haven't been doing that for yourself." She was right. For 15 years, I'd helped other women discover their worth and fight for it, but I'd been living like my own expertise didn't apply to my own life. That Thursday, I got a call that changed everything. David Harrison, from Harrison & Associates, one of Houston's most prestigious law firms, wanted to hire me for a complex divorce case involving hidden international assets. "The retainer is $75,000, he said. "We specifically requested you because of your reputation for finding money that other accountants miss."
In the past, I would have hesitated, worried about Robert's reaction to me taking on such a high-profile case. This time, I said yes immediately. "Send me the files. I'll start this week." That weekend, I drove to Galveston and stayed at a little bed and breakfast overlooking the Gulf. It wasn't Rome, but it was mine. I sat on the balcony with my laptop, working on the Harrison case while watching dolphins play in the surf. I realized something important. I didn't need Rome to feel alive. I needed to stop letting other people convince me that my dreams were too small or too big or too anything. Meanwhile, Elena's surveillance reports from Italy were like reading a cautionary tale about middle-aged men who think they're more clever than they are. Robert was charging everything: expensive dinners, shopping sprees, private tours, to our joint credit cards, completely unaware that I'd already moved all our money. He tried to pay for a $3,000 shopping trip yesterday, Elena reported. His card was declined, had to call the hotel to cover it. The image of Robert trying to impress Amanda with money that was no longer there made me smile. Not a mean smile, exactly. More like the satisfied smile you get when karma finally catches up to someone who really had it coming. Sunday evening, as his return flight approached, I felt completely calm. Not nervous, not angry, just ready. I'd spent the week rediscovering who I was when I wasn't constantly diminishing myself to make someone else comfortable. I'd also lined up everything I needed for his return: Elena's surveillance photos, copies of all financial records, divorce papers ready to be served, and a clear plan for the conversation we were going to have.
The woman Robert had dismissed as too old for adventures had spent his Italian vacation having the greatest adventure of her life. She'd found herself again. And that woman was about to teach him a very expensive lesson about underestimating the wrong person. Are you ready for what happened when he walked through that door? Because I promise you, it was even better than I'd imagined. You know that moment in movies where the villain realizes they've been outplayed? That look of shock when they understand they've completely misjudged their opponent? I got to see that look in real life, and let me tell you, it was even more satisfying than I'd imagined. Robert's taxi pulled into our driveway at 6:43 p.m. on Sunday, March 28th.
I watched from our living room window as he got out, tanned and relaxed, carrying himself with that particular smugness of a man who thinks he's successfully deceived someone he considers intellectually inferior. I was sitting at our kitchen table when he walked in, the same spot where he dismissed my Italian dreams 3 weeks earlier. But now the table held different documents: bank statements, credit card bills, surveillance photos, and divorce papers. "Well," he announced, dropping his designer luggage in the hallway. "Home sweet home, did you miss me?" I looked at him for a long moment, this man I'd lived with for 21 years, and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a calm clarity about what needed to happen next. "How was Italy, Robert?" "Oh, boring business meetings, very tedious." He glanced toward the kitchen window. "Where's my car?" "I sold it." He blinked. "You what?"
I sold it for $47,000. The money's in my account now. I watched his face change as he processed this information. The confident smile faltered. "Clarine, you can't just sell my car." "Our car," I corrected, my voice staying level. "Purchased with marital funds. Under Texas community property law, I had every right to sell it." He moved toward the kitchen table, probably intending to sit down and mansplain why I was wrong. Instead, he stopped when he saw what was spread across its surface. The first thing he noticed was a photograph of him and Amanda sharing a romantic dinner at a restaurant overlooking the Trevi Fountain. "Where did you get this?" "I hired a private investigator, Robert. The same kind I use for my clients whose husbands lie to them about money." I slid another photograph across the table. Robert and Amanda kissing on the Spanish Steps. "Turns out you weren't very careful about covering your tracks. 8 months of affair-related expenses, all documented. The Italian vacation alone cost $23,000 of our money." Robert sank into the chair across from me, finally understanding that he wasn't dealing with the same woman who tearfully accepted his criticism for years. "And before you start calculating how much damage control you'll need to do," I continued, placing the bank statements in front of him, "I've moved all our savings to an account in my name only. $127,000. You can't do that." "Actually, I can. I'm an accountant who specializes in protecting assets during divorces. I know exactly what I can and cannot do legally." I opened another folder and removed the divorce papers. "These were filed Friday. You're being served right now." His hands shook as he picked up the papers. For the first time in our entire marriage, I watched Robert experience genuine fear. "Clarine, we can work this out. It doesn't have to be this way." "You're right," I said. "It didn't have to be this way. You chose this, Robert. You chose to lie to me for 8 months. You chose to steal $34,000 from our marriage to fund an affair. You chose to take another woman on the trip I'd dreamed about for 5 years." I stood up, gathering my documents. "But most importantly, you chose to do all of this because you believed I was too weak, too naive, or too dependent to hold you accountable. That was your biggest mistake." I didn't think. No, you didn't think. You assumed. You assumed I was the same diminished woman you'd spent 20 years convincing me I was. But I'm not that woman anymore. I moved toward the doorway, then paused. "Oh, and Robert, Amanda was fired yesterday. Her employment contract had a morality clause that your company enforced once they received copies of her affair documentation. You might want to find somewhere else to stay tonight." I left him sitting at that kitchen table, staring at evidence of his own stupidity, while I went upstairs to work on the Harrison case. The man who'd told me I was too old for Italy had just received the most expensive education of his life. And the best part, I'd delivered it without raising my voice, without tears, without drama. Just professional competence applied to personal justice. 20 minutes later, I heard his car door slam and his engine start. He'd packed a bag and left, probably to discover that Amanda's apartment wasn't available to him anymore. For the first time in 21 years, my house belonged entirely to me.
Do you know what that feels like? To suddenly have space that's completely yours, where you don't have to manage anyone else's moods or opinions or needs? I sat in our bedroom that night, reading my novel and eating ice cream straight from the container, and felt more at peace than I'd felt in decades. The woman Robert had tried to make invisible had just made him disappear instead. 3 months later, I sat in Patricia's conference room, signing documents that would set me up financially for the rest of my life. Not because I'd won the lottery or inherited money, but because I'd finally learned to value my own expertise enough to use it properly. The settlement exceeded even Patricia's optimistic projections. Final accounting, I kept our $485,000 house, received $340,000 in cash and retirement accounts, retained complete ownership of my accounting practice, valued at $150,000, and secured monthly spousal support of $4,200 for 10 years. Total settlement value? Just over $1.2 million. Robert's final position? $89,000 in remaining assets and a whole lot of expensive lessons about the cost of underestimating people. This is one of the most favorable settlements I've negotiated in 20 years, Patricia told me as I signed the final papers. Your financial documentation made his position impossible to defend. But the money, while nice, wasn't the real victory. The real victory was what had happened to my business during those 3 months. Word spreads quickly in the legal community when someone demonstrates exceptional professional competence under personal pressure. Within weeks of filing for divorce, I'd received consulting requests from law firms across Texas. My reputation for finding hidden assets had expanded into something bigger. Recognition as someone who could maintain professional excellence even while dealing with personal crisis. The Harrison case alone generated $85,000 in fees and led to referrals that doubled my client waiting list. By the time my divorce was finalized, my practice's annual revenue had increased from $180,000 to $320,000. More importantly, I'd started enjoying my work again. Without Robert's constant, subtle criticism undermining my confidence, I approached complex cases with a renewed energy and creativity. I was solving financial puzzles that other accountants couldn't crack, not because I had suddenly become smarter, but because I'd stopped second-guessing myself constantly. The personal transformation was even more dramatic. Remember the woman who asked permission to buy groceries? She was gone, replaced by someone who made decisions quickly and trusted her own judgment. I'd bought a downtown loft with enormous windows and space for a proper home office. I traveled to conferences without worrying about someone else's schedule. I took on challenging cases because they interested me, not because I needed approval from anyone else. 6 months after the divorce was final, I did something that felt like completing a circle. I booked a trip to Italy. Not the romantic couples vacation I'd originally imagined, but something better. A solo photography tour that let me explore at my own pace, see what I wanted to see, and sleep in without someone else's schedule dictating my day. Standing in the Sistine Chapel, surrounded by Michelangelo's masterpieces, I thought about the woman who'd cried in her bathroom because her husband called her dreams impractical. That woman had believed she needed someone else's permission to want things, to dream things, to be things.
This woman, the one who'd rebuilt her business, secured her financial future, and learned to trust her own expertise, knew better. I also thought about Robert, now living in a studio apartment and working for a much smaller insurance company after being quietly let go from his previous job. His affair with Amanda had lasted exactly as long as her employment. About 2 weeks after her termination, she'd moved on to her next target in another city. But I didn't think about him with bitterness or anger. Mostly I felt grateful. His betrayal had forced me to rediscover strengths I'd forgotten I had. His attempt to diminish me had inadvertently freed me to become more successful than I'd ever imagined possible. The most poetic justice was professional. Every month brought new cases where my experience helped other women discover their own power. Mrs. Chen, whose husband had hidden cryptocurrency investments, Miss Rodriguez, whose spouse had transferred business assets to avoid divorce settlements, Mrs. Patterson, whose husband had systematically stolen from joint accounts to fund gambling addiction. Each successful case proved the same lesson Robert had learned the hard way. Underestimating someone's professional capabilities carries serious consequences. But the best part wasn't the money I'd recovered or the recognition I'd received. The best part was the woman I'd rediscovered in the process. Confident, competent, and completely comfortable making her own decisions. At 53, I wasn't too old for anything. I was exactly the right age to finally stop caring what anyone else thought about my dreams, my choices, or my worth.
2 years after signing those divorce papers, I can honestly say I'm living a life I never thought possible when I was married to Robert. Not because I won some financial lottery, but because I finally learned to build a life around my own strengths instead of constantly accommodating someone else's limitations. My accounting practice now employs 4 people and generates over $500,000 annually. We've moved to a beautiful office in downtown Houston with conference rooms overlooking the city, and I have clients waiting 3 months just to get on my schedule. But the number that matters most isn't financial. It's the $7.2 million I've helped recover for women whose husbands thought they were too naive, too emotional, or too dependent to fight back effectively. Every case reminds me of why Robert's betrayal was actually a gift. It forced me to apply my professional skills to my own situation and taught me that expertise means nothing if you don't have the confidence to use it. The recognition has been incredible. I was featured in Houston Business Journal as Entrepreneur of the Year. The Texas Society of CPAs invited me to speak at their annual conference about professional skills in personal crisis. I've been interviewed on 3 local morning shows and a national financial podcast. But the most meaningful recognition comes from my clients. Women like Sarah, whose husband had hidden $300,000 in business accounts. Or Jennifer, whose spouse had systematically drained their retirement funds for an affair that lasted 2 years.
"You didn't just find my money," Jennifer told me after her settlement. "You showed me that I was stronger than I thought I was." That's become my unofficial motto, helping women discover they're stronger than they think they are. My personal life is equally transformed. I live in that downtown loft now, surrounded by art I love and books I actually have time to read. I travel whenever I want, not just Italy, but also Ireland, Iceland, and a photography tour through New Zealand that was absolutely magical.
I've also rediscovered friendships that withered during my marriage because Robert always made social activities about his comfort level. My sister Margaret visits monthly now, and we laugh until our stomachs hurt like we did when we were kids. Sometimes people ask if I ever regret how things ended with Robert. The honest answer is no, not for a single day. His betrayal revealed problems in our marriage that went far beyond adultery. It showed me I'd been living like a guest in my own life for 20 years. The woman who used to ask permission to buy groceries now makes six-figure business decisions without consulting anyone. The woman who once cried because her husband called her dreams impractical now helps other women turn their practical skills into powerful tools for justice. 6 months ago, I got a letter from Robert. He'd heard about my business success and wanted to congratulate me, maybe meet for coffee, to talk about old times. I never responded. Not out of anger, but because we genuinely have nothing to discuss. He's part of a life I've completely outgrown.
The last time I thought about him seriously was when I received a consulting request from a woman whose situation was almost identical to mine. Husband having an affair, using joint funds to finance it, dismissing her intelligence and professional capabilities. As I helped her trace hidden assets and document financial fraud, I realized something profound. Robert's greatest gift to me wasn't the settlement money or even the freedom. It was forcing me to discover that I was capable of building something better than what I'd settled for. Today, at 54, I wake up every morning in a life I designed myself. My work challenges me, my home reflects my taste, my schedule accommodates my priorities. I make decisions based on what I want, not on what someone else thinks I should want. The woman Robert called too old for Italy turned out to be exactly the right age to finally start living like she deserved the best life possible. Do you know what the real difference is between who I was and who I am now? I stopped believing that my worth depended on someone else's opinion of it. And that change is worth more than any settlement, any recognition, any revenge. It's worth an entire lifetime of finally being myself.